Hello, class. This video is going to be a relatively quick one. It's going to be over the rounding, which is your first homework, section 1.2 in MyMathLab. For those of you that want to have work, kind of see what we're doing ahead of time, if you go into Blackboard, under the study resources for Unit 1, lecture note outlines, I'll be working with that rounding 1.2 rounding PDF. And so when I'm making these example videos, this is majority of what I'll be doing. They'll be going in those lecture note outlines that I use in my in-person classes and working pertinent examples from there. So if you want to get these printed off ahead of time before you start the video, that might help make your note taking more efficient. All right, so let's get started. Get into the right camera. All right, so here is that the note outlines for rounding. Now, I will say that from what I've seen, the vast majority of the problems when it comes to rounding, and getting that rust knocked off that, is not the rounding process itself, it's the place value. So let's talk real quickly about place value. I'm just going to throw up a very basic number here. And I'll put the decimal between 5 and 6. All right, so when you're naming your place value, whole number place value, that tends to work fine. It's the decimal place value, a lot of times it gets off. But for whole numbers, we start to the left of the decimal place. That's the ones, and then the tens, and then the hundreds, and so on. So I always start to the left and working our way to the left of the decimal, work to the left. Now, when it comes to naming decimal place values, sometimes students don't want to start on the right and go left, but that decimal point is sort of the middle. Actually, the ones is the middle of the place value, and it goes from there. So we're doing, starting at the decimal, going to the right, and so that 6 is the tenths. 7 is the hundredths. And then just like whole number place value, it's hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, and so on. Now, the way that you know that you have decimal place values is that THS at the end. All right, so some of these homework problems will have whole numbers and decimal parts. So you got to make sure to look for that THS to see which side of the decimal that you're rounding. This is not something you're ever going to get tested on, but sometimes I find it helps students remember where the names are coming from. And this is all based on the fact that our numbers are based on powers of 10. So for example, if I do 10 to the third, what does 10 to the third mean? It's 10 times itself 3 times. So you get 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. And so there is, that 2 is our thousands place value. If you do 10 to the second, well, 10 to the second is 10 times 10, which is 100. And there is your hundreds place value. If you keep going down on that exponent, 10 to the first is just 10. Well, there's our tens place value. So all those whole number place value names come from powers of 10. So where does the ones place value come from? Well, if we continue this pattern, drop our exponent by 1, you get 10 to 0. And so I'm kind of curious as how many of you actually seen this. Usually my in-person classes, like I'll get a handful of people saying they remember what that means. But in general, a 0 exponent means a number divided by itself. Right? So other than 0, anything divided by itself is 1. So by definition, 10 to the 0 is 1. There's our ones place value. Well, where all the decimal place values come from? We continue this pattern. We're dropping our exponent by 1 at 10 to the negative 1. Well, what does a negative exponent mean? Well, and we're going to get to this the beginning of test 2. We'll talk a little bit more about this. For now, just know that a negative exponent means you're going to flip it. And when you flip this, put it over 1, the exponent becomes positive. So that 10 to the negative 1 means 1 over 10 to the first. which we know 10 to the first is 10. Well, what's the name of that fraction? That is 1/10. It's the place value name for that first decimal place value to the right of the decimal. And if we were to continue, we have 10 to the negative 2. That means 1 over 10 to the positive 2, which is 1 over 100, which is 100th by name. So that's where the decimal place values come from. So that's why, if you have 10 to the positive 1 to the negative 1, that's where the tens and tenths come from. 10 to the positive 2 to the negative 2, that's where 100 and hundredths come from. That's why those are all mirrored. But that one's place value comes from 10 to the 0, and positive 0, negative 0 is still just 0. So that's why there's not a 1 and a ones place value. Okay, so start at the ones place value and then go to the left or to the right to name your place values. All right, that's just a quick review of that. All right. So what is the rounding process? Right. So you can actually show your work on this. I don't know if you've ever been taught that. But the first thing when you're asked to round is identify the digit to be rounded using place value. Because if you get the wrong place value, your answer is going to be wrong. So you got to start there. Next thing we do is where most people usually start step 2, is you look one place value to the right. And then if it's 5 to 9, so if it's half or more, you're going to round. We say round up. That means add 1 to the digit being rounded. If it's 0 to 4 to the right of it, then that's less than half. Now we say round down, but you have to be careful because often when people hear round down, they think of subtracting 1. All right. Sorry, I adjusted my audio so I may have a big jump up there. Where you have to be careful, that round down is English, that gets us in trouble. And so we don't subtract 1. Okay? If we're rounding down, that actually means keep it the same. So when you're rounding, it's always either add 1 to the digit being rounded or keep it the same. Now, that's the digit itself. What do you do with the rest of the number? Well, everything to the left has to stay the same, unless we're rounding up 9, and we'll do an example of that. And then everything to the right of the digit being rounded goes to zeros. And if they're decimals, then we tend to drop them, and I'll do an example of that. A couple of other things to point out that people often miss is when we say round, when we're rounding with money, say round to the nearest cent. What place value is nearest cent? For example, if I gave you like a $15 and then 0.3478, I say round to the nearest cent, which place value is cent? The most common wrong answer would be the 3. That the tenths place. But the cent, cent means 100. So we're always doing the hundredths place value. And if you think about it, most money is rounded to 2 decimal places, so we're rounding to the nearest cent. But just make sure, you round that second digit, not the first digit. If it says nearest dollar, well, the nearest dollar is the whole number. Or sometimes we'll say nearest ones or the nearest, that's the place values. If they say whole number, where again, that's the ones place value. So with money, watch out for those two. All right, let's do a couple of quick examples. Okay. So here on number 5, we are rounding 96,762, and there's 10, 100, and 1,000. Quick note, if you ever have a problem in the homework where you're rounding the same number multiple times, always go back to the original number. Don't round like the previous rounded number. Always go back to the original. So if we're rounding to the nearest 10, so here's how I show my work when I'm rounding. So what is the tens place value? That is that 6 on the right. So I underline it, and then I always circle the number immediately to the right. Okay, so how do we round that 6? Well, 2 is between 0 and 4, so that means we're going to round down to keep it the same. So the 6 stays at 6. So I come down below this, 6 stays at 6. Everything to the left stays the same, so 96,706. And then everything to the right of that 6, in this case 2, goes to 0. So rounded to the nearest 10, that's 96,760. All right, so let's do the same with the thousands. So what digit are we rounding to the nearest thousands? So go back to the original number. The thousands is, ones, tens, hundred thousands. That's the left six. And a circle the 7 to the right. So that 7 is more than half. It's 5 or higher. So that says add 1 to the 6. That gives a 7. So the 9 stays a 9. And then everything to the right becomes a 0. So 96,000 times 2 rounded nearest 1,000 will be 97,000. All right. So let's jump down here to decimal place values. So when it says number 9, around 26.282 to the nearest 10th, well, that TH tells us we're in the decimal side on the right. The 10th is the first decimal place, so we're rounding that 2 based on the 8th. So the 8 is 5 or higher, so we're going to add 1 to that 2. 26 stays the same, so it goes 26.3. 8 and the 2 become zeros. Now, that is the correct answer. I would kind of write on a test. Sometimes MATLAB can be picky about what we call these trailing zeros. So MATLAB may count it wrong if you put those 2 zeros at the end. But 26.3 means the exact same thing as 26.300 mathematically. It's just this one on the left says I have 0 hundredths, 0 thousandths. This one just kind of doesn't mention them. So the preferred answer, the decimals, we'd have dropped those trailing zeros. Now, we can't do that with whole numbers. So up here at that 97,000, if you drop those 3 zeros, you have 97. There's a huge difference between 97 and 97,000. There is no difference between 26.300 and 26.3. All right. Normally I would pause for questions, but at this point, can't ask. So, all right. So how about number 10? Round 5.29040 to the nearest thousandth. Okay. And this is where using your fingers comes in handy. So, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So that's the third decimal place. So that is that 0 in the middle. 4 is going to tell me to keep it the same. Everything left stays the same. So 5.29, the 0 stays a 0. 4 and 0 become zeros. And then since those are trailing zeros, we should drop those off. So the preferred answer would be 5.29. All right. So rounding decimals works the same as rounding whole numbers. Just make sure you find your right place value. And then, those trailing zeros is about the biggest difference. A couple other just minor things. Number 12, we have a negative number to round. That negative will not impact the rounding at all. Sorry, but the camera's jumping a little bit. I don't know why. But you round that as normal, you ignore the negative, and just your answer is going to be negative. Okay. All right, let's do one more of these. Let's do number 13. So we're rounding 18,995 to the nearest 10. Okay, so that nearest 10 says that 9 on the right. The 5 says we're going to round it up. And so that means we're going to add 1 to 9. Okay, so here's where it gets a little tricky. So that 9 becomes a 10. So that 9 is now a 0. But 10 means we have, if we have a carry, we have to add 1 to that second 9. That 9 becomes a 10. And then that 8 is going to, 1's going to carry to that 8. That 8 becomes a 9. The 1 stays a 1. And then the 5 goes to 0. So that's the only time that you change the numbers to the left when you're rounding, is if you round up on a 9, it will carry over. As long as there's a bunch of 9s, that carry can continue for a while. All right. Let's see, number 14, round 92.9372 to the nearest whole number. Question is, what place value is whole number? Well, whole number implies we don't want decimals. So whole number is the ones place value. So there's the 9 to the right of it that says add 1 to the 2. So it becomes 93 point, and then 4 zeros. And then we can drop those 4 zeros. So you don't even need the decimal point on that one to do 93. All right. Let's do one of these with money, and then I think we'll call it good. All right. So if we look at number 17, round, stopped up again. So round 0.07714 to the nearest cent. So nearest cent is the hundredths place value. So tenths hundredths is the second place value. So that is that left 7. To the right is another 7, which is more than half. So we round the first 7 to an 8. And we got 0.0 to the left. And then 3 zeros to the right. And then probably got this now with those 3 zeros to the right. They're going to get dropped off. And so we got 0.08. Do we need this 0 on the left? No, you can put just 0.08. For me, especially since I do a lot of notes on the board, it makes it easier for students to read my writing. If I have that 0 in front of the decimal place, so it's hard for me not to put it there, but you don't have to have it. The other thing I will caution you on, MATLAB is not always consistent. You know, like over here on number 10, it might count you wrong if you put those 3 zeros on the right. But often with money, it wants the decimal place to go to 2 decimal places regardless. This is like on the test, as long as it's equivalent answer, I'll give you full credit. But in the homework, when in doubt, don't forget to go to that view example and look at the answer in the example. Like whatever format their answer is in, go ahead and put your answer in that format. All right, that concludes my video on rounding. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Have a good day.